The power of your attention, you guys, is more powerful than you can imagine. Whatever you focus on has to manifest and grow and increase in strength. By seeking God all throughout the day in our heart, it actually activates our third eye to begin to see and perceive the divine energy and essence that permeates everything. And in fact, the famous Saint Lawrence, they would see him washing dishes in the kitchen and glowing with the presence of God. But you just do this a few times a day and you begin to reap powerful spiritual rewards. Now, the topic of this lesson is that devotion is to keep your mind fixed on God. So if we begin or use any working definition for devotion, we can use that. Devotion is keeping the mind fixed on God. And we find that when we attempt to do this, it's not as easy as we thought, right? But I've talked about this before, and I want to bring this theme back because to me this is the most essential theme for understanding devotion, is that devotion increases in direct proportion to the size and the strength of your God idea. And so we've used that term before here on our calls, your God idea. And I want to expand upon that today. Course in Miracles says, God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. I believe it's one of the first maybe 20 lessons in the Course. God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. And so that's the premise for the God idea when I use that term, is that we are all experiencing God to the limits or the capacity of our current level of awareness. And to have awareness of something is to have the idea of it in mind, in attention, in awareness, right? To have the idea of something means you're aware of it. And so, you can think about the feeling you have when something new completely captures your attention. We've all had the experience of, falling romantically head over heels in love with someone, and they just capture your whole attention. You can't do anything without thinking about them. All day long, your mind is fixed on that person. You're just counting the seconds, counting the breaths until you get to be with them again. But we've also experienced this feeling of passion for different forms of art, perhaps, such as music or painting or a new fiction novel that you can't put down. Some of us develop a passion for different modalities like sacred geometry or astrology or gene keys or tarot or some other modality, right? And it sweeps you away. You can't think of anything else. You're just obsessed with it. And so the interesting thing is that we all have this experience, right, of being passionate, being obsessed, having our whole attention and mind consumed with love for something. But isn't God the maker and the creator of all those things that capture our attention? Isn't music, art, sacred geometry, tarot, astrology, isn't anything in the universe you can possibly fall in love with? Isn't it all just different expressions of God's being? So the fact is that God is actually the most devastatingly beautiful, obsessively interesting, marvelous, awe-inspiring fact in the universe. And so the question is, if that's true, and we all resonate to what I just said, yep, that's true, why isn't our mind completely fixed on God at all times with thoughts of love and passion and inspiration and joy? Why does our mind so often wander to distracting things, limiting beliefs, negative thoughts, fear, anxiety, anger, attachment, aversion, jealousy, guilt? Why does our mind so easily wander into these things if God is so all-consuming in God's majesty and perfection? And it's because we haven't increased the size and strength of our God idea to match the totality of what God is. our God idea is very small. And so if you're only relating to a small, limited concept of God in your mind, you won't experience God in everything all around you until that idea expands, right? So Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, his famous instruction to his devotees for reaching enlightenment was love everyone, tell the truth, and always remember God. In fact, Maharaji would say, remember God and repeat the name of God, like mantra repetition. To keep the mind fixed on God always is the most direct path to liberation. So the fact that our whole mind, heart, and attention is not consumed by thoughts of God all day long is a testament to how tiny our God idea is. And that's because, most of us still associate God with religious conditioning of some sort, or whatever the societal idea is of God. And so our mind gets kind of darkened by these, the ignorance of separation. And so we don't see God in everything yet. But one of my favorite quotes by a Spanish mystic from the 16th century, Miguel de Molinos, he said, "You will know that you are far from the truth when you do not see God in everything." You will know that you are far from the truth when you do not see God in everything. So again, this is why for Maharaji, remembering God and repeating God's name was the royal way. God was always just a breath away and appeared again and again on Maharaji's lips all day long, talking about God, reminding everyone to think about God, keep their mind fixed on God. And Maharaji said, the best service that you can do is to keep your thoughts on God. Keep the mind on God every minute and know that everything is God's will. And then Maharaji would also say that God has given us eyes, ears, a nose, mouth, but he also gave us wisdom to use to attain God consciousness. So keep God in your heart, keep God in your mind, like you keep money in a safe. And Maharaji said, he who knows God knows everything. AKA, he who sees God in everything. Knows everything as God. Shankara's famous threefold declaration of the Advaita non-duality path was that only Brahman exists, the world is an illusion or Maya, and God is the world, or Brahman is Maya. Maya is Brahman. So it sounds like a contradiction, right? Only Brahman, God, the absolute. Only God is real, nothing else is real. The whole world, the whole universe is just an illusion, and the whole universe is Brahman. And the third item of those three solves the first two, the paradox of the first two. That when the world is seen as Brahman or God, then it's seen truly, because it's just God. That's all it is. There's nothing else there. When the world is seen as apart from God, as it's something else. There's God, and then there's this world that God created, and all the people God created in it, and they're separate from God. God's creation, God up here, creation down here. When you see it like that, it's all an illusion. You're not seeing reality. It's just God. Every person you see, every blade of grass, every gust of wind is just the Creator. So what can give us the eyes to see God in everything is the question. And it's our theme for today, right? It's the practice of devotion. Devotion alone opens the eyes of the heart to see God in everything. By seeking God all throughout the day in our heart, it actually activates our third eye in direct proportion to become open to the awareness of the Creator in all things. So as we meditate on God in the heart, feel the presence of God in the heart, fix our thoughts on God with loving affection, it actually activates the pineal gland, the third eye chakra, to begin to see and perceive the divine energy and essence that permeates everything. And so more and more we stop seeing separate forms and we directly begin experiencing different manifestations of the one. We just see the ant as, oh, that's one way God expresses. Wow. We see the tree. Oh, that's a way that God expresses. Wow. God is treeing. God is anting. God is peopling. God is waving. God is doing everything, right? It's all activities of God's being. So we come to see that God is not some monolithic being way up in heaven somewhere else. God is the very oxygen which fills our lungs. God is the intelligent energy which permeates all form, all of nature, every cell in my body that works automatically to move my blood, my thyroid gland, my organs. That intelligent energy that is allowing me to be here right now talking to you without thinking about all the billions of things going on behind this skin. That's God. That's the God power. But are you aware of it? Because if you're not, you won't be able to enjoy it, will you? God is in every thought that we think. God is in our very body, in our very mind, our very personality. God is joy itself. God is peace itself. God is silence itself. God is love itself. And so when we come to be seeing, feeling, hearing, tasting, touching God everywhere, our heart becomes filled with this rapt devotion. When we dedicate ourselves to fixing our mind on God as often as possible, our God consciousness begins to awaken. This is why Jesus could say things like, I only do what I see the Father doing. It's a level of God consciousness where everything in the scene about Jesus was God. And so through that awareness, the intelligence of the Creator was able to dictate, direct, and point Jesus in the right directions to be fulfilling God's perfect will through his body. And this happens effortlessly, spontaneously, intuitively. There's no one that has to think about it. It's God moving God, God being God. I can only do what I see the Father doing. I always do what pleases him, Jesus said. And so we start to realize that we never saw God before in the ant because we didn't look for God there, did we? Our mind said, oh, I know what an ant is. This is just a tiny, insignificant ant. This is obviously not God. God's a big, powerful being in the cosmos. This is just a little ant. We didn't see it. We didn't look for God in the ant. This is just a mere tree. I already know what a tree is. It's a lower life form of the vegetable kingdom. Big deal. God's obviously not the tree. God's bigger than the tree. But yet, at the same time, God is the tree. God is bigger than the tree and the tree at the same time. God is everything. So we have to look for God everywhere if we're going to see God everywhere, right? There's no other way the third eye will crystallize that awareness unless we put a demand on it by looking for God in everything. Can you see God in the person who's annoying you? Can you practice seeing the divinity behind the form that's disguising it? Because if you don't, then you won't see it. You won't see it until you look for it. So we have to overcome this ignorance of the ego mind by actively praising God everywhere, looking for God everywhere, seeking to expand our God idea until it encompasses the whole universe. This is the practice of devotion. Expand your God idea until it encompasses the entire universe, until you are incapable of looking at anything and not seeing God. That's the goal and the practice at the same time. So this is how the great saints enter what we call samadhi. Their God idea is so extraordinary that all the saint needs to do is close their eyes and think of one thought about God, and off they go to divine ecstasy. You can just start thinking about God, how the majesty of God manifests in the great mountain peaks, how God's power demonstrates in the mighty rolling thunder in the great ocean, how God's intelligence demonstrates everywhere in nature, in every animal, every creature, in their animal instincts and rituals and survival mechanisms. God's intelligence permeates everything everywhere. And so if you begin to meditate on that, you will start to feel an elevation in your frequency. It's called bliss consciousness. And so if we want to get to the point, which is true fourth density consciousness, where we have bliss all the time, we have to practice integrating bliss, don't we? Everything has to be integrated. It doesn't just come for free without any intention or any effort on your own part. You're the creator. You choose where your attention goes. And so if you don't move your attention away from worldly things, transient pleasures, egoic desires, and move that attention towards the divine, then it won't go there by itself. You're the only creator. So you have to choose where to place your attention. You have to say, I want to experience God all the time, not just in fleeting moments. So I will cultivate that awareness by looking for God all the time, thinking about God all the time, connecting to God's presence all the time. And then you can start practicing in meditation, lifting your mind, your attention to your God idea, and letting your God idea take you away, carry you to heaven, and experience God's majesty, experience God's presence right there where you are. Because God's already all around you, right? God's already in the air you're breathing right now. But if you're not aware of that fact, you don't get to enjoy its benefits. So this can also be practiced throughout the day in ordinary life. The presence of God is made available on earth as it is in heaven through the experience of conscious union. It has to be a conscious union on your part. Because again, God has given all sentient beings the free will to use their attention, their I am, as they wish. So God's not going to force you to place your I am attention, your precious I am power, on God if you want to place it on lust or greed or something. God will let you place it wherever you want. It's got to be on your behalf that you choose to have conscious union with your source throughout the day. So the presence of God is available on earth as it is in heaven, but only through conscious union. So when you're able to reach this state where one single thought of God can sweep you away into euphoria and ecstasy, then you also can enjoy it throughout the day as well, through what we call bliss consciousness. And bliss consciousness is nothing super extraordinary, although sometimes it can be, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, it's just like a subtle feeling of joy and peace that pervades your state of being all throughout the day. It's kind of like a feeling of, like you know the best kept secret in the universe, and you can hardly contain it. And the secret is that God is the very soul of man and every living thing, and that God is manifested everywhere, surrounding, in countless expressions of glory, and yet nobody sees it. But you do. So it's like your best kept secret, and the bliss of that secret, that God is everywhere. It just kind of bubbles up in you all day long. And so it's maybe not an overwhelming joy, although it can be sometimes, but it's always this subdued, kind of compressed feeling of joy, if I can use that term. So I like the analogy for devotion as like nurturing the Christ child. You know, the story of the Christ being born as a babe in swaddling cloths, right? And Mary and Joseph raise the Christ child from infancy to adulthood. That's kind of what we're all doing with the presence of God within us. Because the Christ, the I am spirit nature of what you are, is the Christ. But it's kind of like a babe, right? It's like a little infant that needs to be nurtured into maturity. And so you can never rise higher in consciousness than the current limit of your God idea. And each one of us right now has a certain God idea, a certain level of awareness of what God is, who God is. And so we must all start with what we have, right? We must begin with what we've been given. If you have even this much awareness of God's presence, or if your God idea is only this big, great, start with this. See God in this much, and it'll start to expand. It'll start to rise and increase and reach out to touch everything surrounding as you nurture it, as you practice it, as you contemplate God, contemplate the Creator in everything you see. And then begin to, not just with the masculine, with the awareness, but with the heart, the feminine, feel God in what you're seeing. It's one thing to be aware of God in the ant and say, oh, I see that that's God in there. It's another thing to feel the presence of God in the ant. So if you can do both of those things, you get double the power, double the bang for your buck in expanding your God idea. So just like we raise a newborn infant into adulthood with care and protection and nurturing, we have to raise our God idea into full maturity as well through daily devotion. Your devotion to God is your nurturing of your God idea, letting it grow, right, in time as it matures, becomes deeper, richer, more wise, more powerful, more loving, more all-encompassing. We all have this kind of newborn Christ child within us. But if we don't give it our attention and our devotion, it will remain an infant, won't it? Kind of just laying there in potential, being glimpsed and touched every so often, but never expanded and grown and matured. So the more we give our attention to the Christ principle in us, the God presence, the I am, the more it grows and matures, and then the more we enjoy the bliss of that conscious union. We come to know God is my very own self. God is the first person in the present tense. I am. And so when I connect to I am, I connect to the very presence of God. And that's first an idea that you have to focus on and meditate on, and it eventually becomes a direct, lived experience. So if you're like, Aaron, come on, I know this stuff, but I don't feel it yet. When I say I am, it's just words. It doesn't mean anything to me. That's okay. Just keep repeating the words with the desire to connect with the essence. Keep repeating the words I am with the devotion to experiencing the truth of I am. Devotion is what shows up when you don't feel everything, when you don't feel great, when you don't feel inspired. Can you still be devoted? When you're not having an easy day, when it's a challenging day and you feel completely separate from the presence of God, you feel like God is a million miles away, can you still be devoted then? Because I promise you, in those moments, in those days where you say, God, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like you're a million miles away. I don't feel the slightest tinge of your presence. I feel lost in darkness, alone. I feel hopeless. But God, even here, I will praise your holy name. I will bless you, God, with my heart and my soul. Even when you feel far away, I know you're closer than my breath. It's just my mind getting in the way of my awareness. But you cannot be any farther than me, farther from me than my own I am feeling. And you can just still stay in devotion to God and lift your mind to God, even when you don't feel it that day. And I promise you, I've learned this from experience. You get the most bang for your buck when you're devoted in those times, because it's easy to be devoted when you feel joyful, right? Everyone can do it. Who's the real devotee? Other than the person who, when they feel alone and far away from their beloved, they still give praise. They still turn their mind and heart to God and say, even in the pit, even in the dust of despair, I will praise you. I will love you. I will devote myself to you. And man, the universe takes note of that, guys. What more powerful demonstration of your will can there be than when you're suffering and you still cry out to God? Someone's going to gain some SQ points doing that. And in fact, that's actually the whole reason, by the way, we go through dry seasons. We talk about the ascension spiral, how we're always kind of spiraling through our energy field, and we go through periods where the positively polarized energy gets to be experienced and enjoyed. We go, wow, I feel so joyful. I feel so peaceful and expanded. This is great. And then a week goes by and we're back in the lower frequencies again. A die-off, a release. We feel flat in our frequency. We don't feel the joy anymore. And we're like, man, this is so tough. Why do I go through these spirals? Well, it's because every time you spiral around, you're cleaning up. You're getting an opportunity, rather, to clean up more of the negative energy. So you've got to take advantage of it while you're there. Because if you don't, you're going to keep swinging around that merry-go-round. It's going to keep coming up, right? what is negatively charged in you as a positively polarized being has to come up eventually in cycles. It can't stay suppressed forever. And it comes up in every little seemingly mundane way, right? A little bit of an attitude towards somebody is that energy coming up. Feeling of frustration while driving, all the way to a freaking dark night of the soul, where you're days on end, weeks on end, buried alone in your room, crying, screaming, just in anguish. That whole spectrum represents something coming up to be healed. And so this is why we go through these seasons, we might call them, because when we're in the negative frequencies, when the die-off is happening, when something's coming up to be seen and healed, can you still stay devoted there? Because if you go back into victimhood and start crying about, why have you forsaken me, God? Why have you abandoned me? Where'd you go? This is so unfair. I'm doing so much spiritual practice. I shouldn't suffer anymore. Then you've just left the heart of devotion. Devotion is to trust your beloved always. To know that your beloved always has your best interest in mind and your highest good in mind. And so even when I don't know, even when I can't see, still I will praise you. Still I will give you my full attention. And when that spiral comes back around and the negative frequency is lifted, you get an upgrade in frequency. You experience a higher level of joy than before. You experience a higher level of bliss than before. And I'm not speaking this to you guys from some kind of book knowledge. This has been my journey. This has been my path for years now. I've watched and studied this progression in myself. There's always a spiraling. There's always a rotation of negative to positive, like a vibration. And as we rise in frequency, the negative simply gets less intense. It gets subtler. It gets harder to see. Maybe our negative downward dips are no longer taking us into depression, but they take us into a kind of just feeling of normalcy or something. You're not in that bliss anymore, and you're like, I don't feel bad, God, but I don't feel that bliss that I want so much. And so you know that, okay, I'm in the spiral right now. So while we're here, let's praise God. Let's take advantage of this to show our level of devotion. And it begins to increase as you can be faithful in the dry seasons as well as the fruitful seasons. So let me give you guys, as we wrap up, 3 ways to increase devotion. If I had to give you 3 tips on what you can do to really stoke the flames of devotion in yourself. Number 1 is practicing the presence. We've talked about this quite a bit, haven't we? The goal of devotion is to fall madly in love with God. And so if God is everyone and everything in existence, then every single moment can be engaged through the remembrance and the awareness of God. So even the most seemingly mundane aspects of life, such as going to the grocery store, taking out the trash, washing the dishes, all of these things can be permeated with a blissful awareness of God's presence. And in fact, the famous Saint Lawrence, who wrote Practicing the Presence in the 17th century, I want to say, he was famous for this, that there was people who told stories about him, that they would see him washing dishes in the kitchen and glowing with the presence of God, because he was always practicing the presence. And that is simply just to turn your thoughts several times a day to the heart, to the place where you can sense that gentle presence of love, and through your heart, just kind of smile into that presence. Like, recognize it, acknowledge it, right? Give attention to the presence. This can start with, you can do this twice a day. You can make this a twice a day practice. Every day, just at 2 points of the day minimum. 2 is my minimum. I'm going to turn my attention towards the presence of God. And maybe you do it sometime in the morning, and then around dinner time, you're getting ready and you go, oh yeah, practicing the presence. You take a moment, you go within, you place your attention on the heart, you feel the presence of love, and you smile into that love. Say, hello, God. Thank you for being here with me. And then you move on. And if you can just do it even once or twice a day, it has a kind of magnetic effect to it. It's addictive. It becomes like the only water that truly quenches your thirst. So you give that presence attention, you give it thanks, you give it praise, and you move on. It could be 1 minute, it could be 30 seconds. But you just do this a few times a day, and you begin to reap powerful spiritual rewards. And pretty soon, all you want to do is be aware of God's presence in every activity, in every moment. But you have to start somewhere, right? The second tip for increasing devotion, which we've also talked about, is following your passion. And we said this at the beginning of the lesson. Our passions reveal God to us. Because when you fall in love with something, whether it's a science, an art form, a hobby, anything, a person, doesn't matter, anything you fall in love with is actually just an aspect of God that you're in love with. But do you see that? Or are you still mistaking it for a form or a separate thing of some sort? So use what you're passionate about. Use what captures your interest and attention, and begin to see God in that thing. This is one of the best ways to increase your devotion to God, I promise you. You could watch, an inspiring documentary about something, and you can see God in whatever it's about. We watched one about, the soil a few months ago that we really loved. We watched Fantastic Fungi that I mentioned on a call. And can you see God's intelligence in the fungi of Earth and all the things the fungi does in Earth and go, wow, God is just so magnificent. If you can see God in it, it increases devotion. It increases love in your heart. And so you can actually chase your passions, pursue your passions, because you know all of them are different expressions of God. And so you have full license to explore and discover and love and appreciate everything, because it's all just God. So everything in the world that can be enjoyed, that can be explored, is God. Are you looking for it? Start looking for it. This will increase both your love for God and your passion for life itself, and that's devotion. And then the third tip, which we haven't talked much about in 40U calls before, is mantra repetition. Mantras are powerful technologies, but they have to be used in a certain way to really work effectively. If you can start your day with, let's say, a 10-minute meditation and just looping a mantra of some sort, whatever mantra provokes you to feel centered on God. It could be I am. That's my favorite. I am, I am, I am. And just loop that. It could be God is love, God is love, God is love, God is love. Or it could just be God, the name of God. It could be anything that provokes you to feelings of devotion to God. Loop that in the morning. It's called japa. And then strive in any moment where you don't need to actively think about something to repeat that mantra throughout the day. Look for the dead space in your day. This is what I found to be most effective with mantras, right? If you need to be on a phone call, do emails, talk to somebody, run an errand, think about something, solve a problem, no big deal. Be engaged in the present moment with what you need to do. But when you don't need to actively think about something, which is 95% of our day, right? Can you fill that dead space with the mantra? Can you go back to the mantra? And the first phase of when you know that your mantra is working is when the ego starts to question the mantra. And you'll hear your ego mind saying things like, come on, what good is this really doing? What a waste of time. Oh, what's the point of this mindless repetition? And when the ego starts to push back against your mantra and question it, this is so stupid, nobody repeats something all day, I'm a lunatic. You know it's starting to work, because what's happening? The mind is becoming one-pointed. All of the attention is zeroing in on one thing, and that's what the ego fears the most. Because a mind that is able to concentrate, we talk about this in Meditation Mastery, Module 1, right? A mind full of the power of concentration is an uncontrollable mind for the ego. Ego needs a very lazy, undisciplined, unfocused mind. And then it can just grab your attention and move it wherever it wants. Over here, over there, this thought, that thought, this thought, this thought. And you're just being carried away, swept away by the ocean of thoughts. But when you hone your mind in on one thing, God is love, 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 God is love. And the ego tries to pull you away. No, stop thinking about God is love. Think about this. Think about this. And maybe you do. Oh, I can't believe she said that. Wait, no. God is love. God is love. You're draining the ego of energy when you do that. And secondly, you're training your mind to be able to focus on something. And that's a very important ability to have for devotion. Remember we said devotion is keeping the mind fixed on God. So if you can't even fix your mind on a mantra, how could you fix it on God yet? First, be able to do it with something simple, right? If you can train your mind to hold on to a mantra, you can use that same discipline to hold on to the awareness of God's presence. Because let's be honest, a mantra that you can repeat mentally, I am, I am, I am. It's very tangible, right? I can say the words I am all that I want. I can just keep saying them and they're always there. But the presence of God, the feeling of the presence of God, the presence of love is seemingly more fleeting and subtle than that. It doesn't feel like we have the same command to just always immediately be able to contact the presence of love and bliss at any moment, right? It seems like it comes and goes, and when it's there, we enjoy it, and when it goes, we say, okay, thank you. It's not like we have the ability to just provoke it, right? Well, we do if we can train the power of our focus, of our attention. And so you can be able to repeat, you can be able to connect to the presence of God as easily as you can say a mantra, if you can first say the mantra and say it throughout the day. Keep your mind on it for long periods of time. There's no more useful tool for training a strong, abiding awareness of God's presence than a mantra. And this is why the Hindus are so big on mantras, because they know that they work. And really the Buddhists are as well, to another extent, but especially in India, man, it's like mantra chanting, japa chanting is one of the most common practices given for good reason. It's like a simple, easy practice you can give any entry-level devotee to really make significant progress quickly, if they can give themselves to the discipline. So it's admittedly difficult, and it cannot be done half-heartedly. But when it's done with real sincerity, just being able to keep your attention on a mantra, wanting to keep your attention on a mantra is devotion, isn't it? You're devoted to the mantra. As what? As a symbol of your devotion to God. You're saying, God, I want to be able to fix my mind on you all day without wavering. And so to practice that, I'm going to fix my mind on this mantra about you or of you that points to you. I am, I am, I am, I am. And as often as I have free time, when I don't need to think about something, when I'm in the pantry, rearranging things or whatever, cooking, I am on the inside. And what very advanced mantra japa chanters will tell you is that eventually the mantra goes on by itself. And while you're talking on the phone, there's a voice in the back of your head. I am, I am, I am. You've ingrained it into the mind. You've drilled it into the mind. Because the power of your attention, you guys, is more powerful than you can imagine. Whatever you focus on has to manifest and grow and increase in strength. And so at a certain point, you chant the mantra, and then eventually the mantra starts chanting you. And you're just in the frequency all day long. I am, I am. It's carrying you. And all of a sudden, the deeper meanings, the feeling, the experience of I am begins to flourish in your consciousness. The words I am take you to the experience of I am.